Every second, millions of distinct decisions occur in the global marketplace. Organizational success depends on how effectively a company decodes the needs driving those decisions. To study this academically, marketing management requires strict taxonomies. While everyday conversation blends these terms together, we must separate the market into a precise academic triad: the consumer, the buyer, and the customer. The consumer is the end user. This is the entity that directly uses or secretes the good or service. The buyer, however, is the person executing the actual purchase transaction. They buy the goods for resale, production, or for the use of somebody else. If a man buys a sari for his wife to wear, he is the buyer, but she is the consumer. Finally, the customer is an entity characterized by routine. This is someone who regularly purchases a specific product or habitually shops at a particular store. A mother buying baby food every week is the customer. Her infant is the consumer. Distinguishing between the person swiping the credit card and the person utilizing the product is the necessary first step in building a coherent marketing strategy. Once we identify the specific actors in the market space, the focus shifts from who they are to the mechanics of what they do. This brings us to consumer behavior. By definition, this is the study of how individuals make decisions to spend their available resources. It maps out what they buy, why they buy it, when they buy it, and where they buy it from. Crucially, this is a mental framework, not a purely physical one. The physical act of handing over cash is simply the final, visible output of a complex internal negotiation. A purchase is rarely a random event. It is the result of a structured cognitive process. By mapping that process, marketers can predict and ultimately influence the final decision. This chart shows the consumer decision-making process. It operates as a universal 5-step engine that drives almost every deliberate purchase. Step 1 is problem recognition. Every transaction begins with an unsatisfied need or want. The consumer realizes a gap exists between their current state and their desired state. Step 2 is the identification of alternatives. The consumer actively searches for information, scanning their memory and the external environment for available substitutes that can solve their specific problem. Step 3 is the evaluation of alternatives. Here, the consumer collects the data and weighs the competing brands, analyzing their specific features, prices, and trade-offs. Step 4 is the purchase decision. The consumer finally reaches the point of friction, where they resolve to buy the product now, delay the purchase, or abandon it entirely. Step 5 is post-purchase behavior. After acquisition, the consumer experiences either satisfaction or cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the mental discomfort or regret a buyer feels when they notice the flaws of their chosen product or hear about the benefits of the alternatives they rejected. A marketer's involvement begins long before the transaction. They supply information and establish trust at every node of this flow to guide the consumer toward their specific brand. However, consumers do not execute a deep analysis for every single item they buy. We can categorize this variance using Henry Assell's matrix, which graphs the level of consumer involvement against the perceived differences between competing brands. When involvement is high and brand differences are significant, we see complex buying behavior. These are expensive, highly visible, and infrequent purchases, like a new car. The consumer will rigorously follow all 5 steps of the decision process. If the purchase is expensive but the consumer sees very little difference between the available brands, they engage in dissonance-reducing behavior. They buy relatively quickly based on price or convenience, but actively seek validation afterward to justify their significant investment. For low-cost everyday items where brands are nearly identical, like table salt or bread, consumers use habitual buying behavior. There is no active research or evaluation. They simply grab what they recognize out of habit. Finally, variety-seeking behavior occurs when involvement is low but brand differences are high. Think of cookies or soft drinks. Consumers frequently switch brands not because they are dissatisfied, but purely for the sake of novelty. Mapping a product on this matrix dictates the strategy. It tells a marketer whether they must design detailed informational brochures for a complex buyer or rely on repetition and premium shelf placement to capture a habitual one. A consumer's position within that matrix is influenced by 6 categories of forces. First are psychological factors. the internal mechanics of motivation, perception, learning, and deeply held beliefs that dictate how individuals interpret the world. Second and third are cultural and social factors. These apply external pressure through society's broad values, localized subcultures, class structures, and the influence of family and reference groups. Fourth are personal factors. This is the biographical reality of the consumer, including their age, their specific stage in the family life cycle, their occupation, and their chosen lifestyle. Finally, economic and environmental factors dictate the macro conditions. A buyer is constrained by their personal income, savings liquidity, political stability, and the current pace of technological advancement. Together, these variables form a complete profile of the consumer's environment. They build the stage upon which a consumer's internal motives will operate. If the factors build the stage, the buying motive is the engine. A motive is the driving force, the explicit reason why a person executes the purchase of a particular product. Marketers classify these drivers by their origin. Internal motives are psychological needs originating strictly within the mind, whereas external motives are influenced by the outside environment, such as religion or social class. They distinguish between product motives, where the consumer is driven by the physical characteristics of the item itself, versus patronage motives, where the consumer is driven to buy from a specific trusted manufacturer or trader, regardless of the exact item. We must also separate rational motives, decisions based on economic logic and functional reasoning, from irrational or emotional motives, which rely on personal feelings. Finally, motives are categorized as inherent, satisfying basic human survival instincts like hunger and safety, or learned, which are desires acquired from the environment, like fashion or cleanliness. Identifying the dominant motive allows a marketer to design a strategy that aligns with the consumer's internal drive. Because these motives and environmental factors are so varied, treating every consumer with the same message is an inefficient use of resources. Wendell R. Smith introduced market segmentation, dividing a scattered market into distinct groups sharing similar needs. First, it's segmented externally by demographics, age, sex, income, and geographics. Then, marketers drill into internal variables. Psychographic segmentation groups by lifestyle, while behavioral divides by exact product loyalty. From there, a company can deploy specific patterns: undifferentiated for mass appeal, differentiated to hit distinct groups, concentrated to focus on one niche, or customized for personalized service. Segmentation clears the noise. It forces a company to define exactly who they are prepared to speak to. Once the market is neatly sliced, the firm executes market targeting. This is the evaluation of each segment's profitability and the explicit selection of which groups to formally enter. Large organizations frequently utilize a multi-segment approach, directing marketing efforts at 2 or more distinct segments simultaneously by developing a specific product mix for each. That specific alignment brings us to product positioning. If segmentation is the act of categorizing the consumers, positioning is the act of designing the product to occupy a distinct, calculated place in the target market's mind. It's the architectural flip side. Positioning creates the perfect external image to lock directly into the consumer's internal driving motive. Marketing management replaces guesswork with a structured response to human psychology. Mastering this framework provides the necessary foundation for managing modern consumer markets.